Hello, everyone, and welcome to Spaceflight Now's live coverage of the latest mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. I'm Will Robinson Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now. So good to have you with us here on this Thursday evening. We're broadcasting, as we always do, from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Tonight, SpaceX's fourth attempt to try and launch this communications satellite on behalf of Indonesian company PSN. This is the Nusantara Lima spacecraft, which will head out to a geosynchronous transfer orbit upon departure from Florida's Space Coast. SpaceX, as you can see in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, is less than an hour away from the first opportunity it has tonight. A planned liftoff of 7:59 p.m. Eastern, 23:59 UTC. Weather's certainly looking better than it has throughout the course of this past week, so fingers crossed all continues to move well with this countdown campaign. And we see a good liftoff of that Falcon 9 rocket in 58 and a half minutes. As we're getting things going tonight, I want to thank the nearly 700 of you who are watching with us live at this point in the count. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button and sharing the stream, allowing some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage tonight. Our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, is running the technical operations of the broadcast alongside John Pisani. Our Adam Bernstein out and about working the tracking cameras once again, making sure everything is ship shape for launch departure, fingers crossed. If you're not following our full photography team here, you can find them, their handles here on X. Adam is at Aburn NYC. Michael Kane is at MD Kane Jr. John is at John Pisani Photo. Also be sure to follow Spaceflight Now simply at Spaceflight Now. You can also find us on Blue Sky, Threads, and Facebook. We'll also be joined later this evening by our friend Pete Carsons with Max Q Productions. We're joined at this point at the start of the broadcast, though, by our friends Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images, keeping tabs on the Falcon 9 from the vantage point on Merritt Island, and a lovely view of the Banana River to boot. Also want to thank our moderators in the live chat who are helping us out tonight. Thanks to Rick Donner and Astro Joe. If you do see any of the other mods cruise in throughout the course of the countdown, be sure to give them a big old Spaceflight Now hello. You can help make the mods' jobs that much easier just by following the rules of the live chat. We ask that you make your comments in English so that our mods can respond as appropriate. Also, we ask that you restrain from delving into overt politics or religion. Hold off on using all caps. Emojis are perfectly fine. We just ask that you don't create a huge block of them so it takes up chunk of the live chat there. And last but certainly not least, we ask that you treat each other with the kindness and respect that you yourselves would like to be treated, and we'll get along swimmingly. This and every live launch opportunity is made possible in no small part thanks to the ongoing support from our YouTube channel members. So thanks to folks like Wanderdog, Jake, Greg Smith, Angela Cagle, BC Stargazer, Sulfur for Lunch, and many, many others. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, which is shop.spacelightnow.com. Access to our member-only videos here on YouTube, access to our members-only Discord server, and of course the ability to watch all of our live launch liftoff moments from here in the Cape in 4K. Want to welcome in new channel members Gordon Henderson, joining us with membership at the Mission Specialist level tonight, and to WDBF Radio, joining us at the Pad Leader level. Welcome aboard. We're glad to have you both with us. Last little bit of housekeeping. If you have a comment or question about this mission or other goings on in the realm of space or spaceflight, You can use the YouTube Super Chat feature to have your comment or query elevated for discussion, assuming it's appropriate for discussion, of course. Not only will you be giving us some interesting things to talk about as we cruise on through the countdown, but you'll also be supporting what we do here at Spaceflight Now, and that, my friends, is always greatly appreciated. To that end, I want to thank Kumar John for a super chat. Thank you, Kumar. And thanks as well to channel member Chuck Close for a very generous $25 super chat. Thank you, Chuck. Really appreciate you supporting us at that level. Good to see you tonight. Well, it seems prudent that we begin the broadcast talking about the main elephant in the room, as it were, with this mission, which is, of course, the weather. It has been a darn sticking point for SpaceX getting to launch this mission tonight. You're looking at a wide view overlooking the pad, now looking at the satellite vantage point from NOAA's GOES East satellite. You can see the clouds that are streaming from the southwest to northeast across the Sunshine State as nightfall begins to descend over the Space Coast. Heading into this launch opportunity, the 45th Weather Squadron forecast a 45% chance for favorable weather at liftoff. Unlike some of the previous launch attempts that we've seen, the meteorologists this go round didn't give a sort of gradient, if you will, of the forecast where it starts off as one thing and then ends up something else. This is 45% favorability across the board. If SpaceX is once again unable to launch tonight and needs to pivot to their backup opportunity tomorrow, that is a true coin toss at 50% possibility for favorable weather, 50% no go. So we will see what the weather has in store for SpaceX tonight, and if they're able to stick where they are at the moment, which right now it would see them lift off at their first launch opportunity at 7:59 p.m. Eastern, 23:59 UTC. You can see some of those clouds coming in onshore. And a close-up of the rocket as the sun starts to set here on Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. SpaceX is starting to get into some traffic territory here at Pad 40. It did have a bit of wiggle room before this pad was needed again, but now it is right up against the next launch, which is right currently scheduled for Sunday, September 14th, which will be the flight of Northrop Grumman's Cygnus spacecraft up to the International Space Station. SpaceX's turnaround record for Pad 40 is roughly 2 days and 8 hours and some change. So launch tonight would still put them a bit beyond the pad turnaround record, but getting pretty close to it. There's a pre-launch briefing scheduled regarding the NG-23 mission tomorrow. So if this mission does launch tonight, hopefully we'll get a good confirmation that things are on track for a Sunday launch of the next cargo run to the International Space Station. If not, NASA will likely have an opportunity on the range coming up on Monday. We will have to wait and see, though. Of course, it all starts with the hopeful launch from the pad here tonight in just about 50 and a half minutes from now. Just about 49 minutes left on the clock for today's planned launch from Pad 40. Let's go ahead and talk about the countdown timeline for today's mission. Let you know the milestones that are ahead for SpaceX as we will hopefully see a Falcon 9 rocket launch tonight. Of course, the first big make or break point is coming up at T minus 38 minutes when the SpaceX launch director makes the call that they are ready to proceed with the start of fueling. Once that go ahead is given, tanking of the Falcon 9 rocket will begin at T minus 35 minutes with the loading of RP1, a rocket grade kerosene on board the Falcon 9's first and second stages. At the same time, liquid oxygen will begin to flow on board the Falcon 9's first stage. 30 minutes out, the first stage helium loading begins. Same is true on the second stage a few minutes afterwards. That cryogenic helium is important because it's used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. T minus 23 minutes is when the second stage RP1 tank reaches flight levels. And at T minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds is the beginning of the strong back chill down. SpaceX thermally conditions the feed lines there at the pad prior to loading liquid oxygen on board the rocket's second stage. We see this visually manifest as the so-called big vent, which begins at pad 40, T minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds. Lasting just under 4 minutes in duration, it sets up liquid oxygen to start flowing on board the upper stage of the Falcon 9, T minus 16 minutes. Moving right along, 7 minutes out, the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines begins. This process involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps that'll help protect the engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. 6 minutes before flight, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. Then at T minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the retraction of the strong back. First, the clamp arms just beneath the payload fairings open up, and then the transporter erector, otherwise referred to as the strong back, that reclines about a few degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket, and it stays in that position until liftoff. And at that point, it'll pull back in a much more rapid fashion to about 45 degrees, clearing the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. 3 minutes before takeoff, the first stage liquid oxygen tank is full. 2 minutes out, same is true on the second stage. At that point, the Falcon 9 rocket is fully loaded with 1 million pounds propellant. In the final 60 seconds, the rocket enters into its automated startup sequence. At that time, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers. Also, the propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. The SpaceX launch director will give their go for launch call at T minus 45 seconds. The engine ignition command will be issued at T minus 3 seconds. And if all 9 Merlins are healthy and ignite as expected, and of course, the weather cooperates, we'll see a liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket at the T0 point, which, as I speak these words, is currently at T minus, or excuse me, at 7:59 p.m. Eastern, 23:59 UTC, or T minus 45 minutes, 35 seconds. The Falcon 9 rocket, patiently waiting for its departure. Once it does head off from Florida's Space Coast, we'll see an entrant come back into the top of the Falcon 9 frequent flyers list. Here's a quick reminder of where things currently stand. B1078 is the booster on tap to deliver the Nusantara Lima satellite up into geosynchronous transfer orbit. Here's where SpaceX stands as far as its most recent set of missions on the year. 113 so far. Looking for flight number 114. Fingers crossed in just a little more than 44 minutes from now. Time now T minus 43 minutes and counting. As we're getting things rolling, let us know where you're watching from tonight. I know it's getting to be a little bit cloudy, so this might not be quite the best of launch viewing for folks that are further out into the central Florida area, but hopefully it won't be too bad of a launch viewing experience for you. Let's take a look at the turn basin view, and you can see a lot of the clouds are really uh, largely offshore from this vantage point. Some thinner, wispier clouds over the spaceport at the moment, closer to the press site. Sunset tonight here on the Space Coast is coming up right about at 7:30, so depending on how much cloud cover we have, it could be a nice jellyfish effect that we could see if this rocket departs at 7:59 as currently scheduled. We'll go over trajectory with our map here a little bit closer to liftoff so that more folks can see it all together. But given this is a mission to a geosynchronous transfer orbit, the rocket will be flying due east once it leaves the pad. Taking a look at where some folks are joining us today. Got Toledo, Ohio from Judith White, Jake, channel member in Sanford, Florida. Got Darren in Southern Arkansas, Mark Thomas down in St. Lucie. Vanna joins us from Greece. Always great to see that we've got a global audience in the house. About 39 and a half minutes remaining on the clock. Roughly a minute and a half to the point in which SpaceX will make the call on the start of prop load tonight. SpaceX, well, I was going to say SpaceX does its poll electronically, so it can make that call if it feels like it's in a good posture to do so. However, that is not the case at this moment in time. We do have a new T0, so we're adjusting our clocks. Please stand by. It looks like we've got 8:29 now on the board, folks. 8:29 p.m. Eastern, 00:29 UTC for those around the world. So we are once again back an hour plus, T minus 1 hour, 8 minutes, and 18 seconds, and counting. For those of you who are just joining us, once again, we are targeting, or SpaceX is targeting, I should say, a new T0 of 8:29 p.m. Eastern, 0029 UTC for those around the world for what will hopefully be the launch of the Nusantara Lima spacecraft on behalf of Indonesian company PSN. Do want to thank a few folks for their support tonight as hopefully SpaceX is now inching closer to the liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket. Jeff Control, one of our channel members with a good attitude here, who says launch odds improve if you donated a little more. Well, if only that were true. Suppose it's worth a shot. Also want to thank Jeff Shiner for a very generous 50 Canadian dollars super chat. Really appreciate that, Jeff. Thank you for supporting us at that level. And Jeff says SpaceX is looking for rapid relaunches, but even so-so weather seems to halt a launch. Are they making changes so they can launch in less favorable weather? Well, that would be, I suppose, the most ideal thing for a launch provider, but there's, certain limitations that even the most stalwart of rocket companies can muster, when it comes to the thickness of clouds and the presence of thunderstorms, there's not a whole lot that SpaceX can do about that, even with improvements to performance for its Falcon family of rockets or, its Starship vehicle. I'm not going to pretend to know everything that SpaceX has cooking behind the scenes, but I think a rocket that's more resistant to impacts of weather, I'm not sure that they've got something specifically in the works to address that. But thank you for the question. And Makaz J marking 6 months with us as a member at the pad leader level says, "Wow, this one little rocket's giving a lot of OT for the Spaceflight Now crew." Eh, no kidding. Silver lining is, you can see some more aquatic life out in the waters at the Turn Basin when you've got these late launches. Things cool down and the wildlife comes out to play. Check with our Turn Basin every now and again. You can spot what is either a dolphin or perhaps a manatee is hanging out in our view right now. So we'll keep this shot up for a little bit while the light is good and keep your eyes peeled. T minus 1 hour and counting once again, as SpaceX is hopefully in the final hour of the countdown for this planned launch from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Peeling away from our turn basin view, giving you sort of a wider view of the sky here as we look across the lawn of the KSC press site. It's here Adam Bernstein making his way back out to one of the cameras. Certainly earns his steps when it comes to a launch like this. And as he was saying, it sort of feels like Bill Murray and Groundhog Day with this cyclical launch campaign. Hopefully, this will be the last time that we talk about the countdown to the launch of the Nusantara Lima spacecraft, but we shall see. If SpaceX does end up needing to pivot to a backup opportunity tomorrow, they have a launch window of roughly 118 minutes that begins at 7:58 p.m. Eastern. Today's launch opportunities run until 9:56, so it moves up by just a minute every day, it seems. Worth noting again, though, for those who were not with us at the point of the broadcast that I mentioned this. Next up on this pad is the Northrop Grumman Cygnus spacecraft, hoping to launch up to the International Space Station on Sunday, September 14th. If this rocket doesn't fly tonight, SpaceX would be quite hard pressed to turn around the pad in time for a Sunday launch. The pad turnaround record is a little more than 2 days and 8 hours, so gets right up to that limit. Nice little manatee cameo there. Just about 57 minutes on the board at this point in time. Here's a look at the mission patch for today's hopeful launch of the Nusantara Lima satellite, augmenting the communications capabilities from the Satria spacecraft that was launched back in June of 2023. Originally, this spacecraft was also supposed to launch that year, but it did face a couple of years of delays before it obviously got ready to get to the pad here today. Here's an artist's rendering of what the spacecraft will look like once it is in its operational on-orbit position at 113 degrees east over the equator. Another graphical representation of the spacecraft using its spot beam to send connectivity down to the surface. And that on the right, of course, is the actual spacecraft itself in its launch configuration with its solar wings tucked up into its body. Here's a look at the spacecraft from another couple of angles with some Boeing technicians in the foreground and surrounding the spacecraft, so you can get an idea of its true scale inside that clean room prior to its launch campaign. This particular satellite was built on a Boeing Space Systems 702 MP VHTS bus, stands for Very High Throughput Satellite. Designed to offer a capacity of 160 gigabits per second with the 101 Ka band spot beam. The spacecraft is designed to have a roughly 15-year operating life. Here's a picture of the spacecraft being bundled up, getting ready to be shipped out here to the Cape. Mentioned the NG-23 mission with a Cygnus spacecraft is coming up for a launch no earlier than Sunday the 14th. There was a mission to the space station that was able to successfully launch earlier today. A Russian Soyuz rocket launched with a Progress vehicle that is now making its way up to the orbiting outpost, set to dock at the space station on Saturday. It brings with it about 3 tons of cargo and supplies to the Russian side of the space station. That was Russia's 12th orbital launch of the year so far. mission tonight on tap, set to be SpaceX's 114th. This is also this will be the 132nd launch from a U.S. rocket provider, if all goes well tonight. 53 and a half minutes on the clock remaining. Once again, as a reminder, the T-minus 38-minute mark is, broadly speaking, when the SpaceX launch director needs to make the call on the start of prop load, so a little less than 20 minutes from now. They can do so, or they do that process electronically. So if they're feeling good, it can happen a little bit earlier than that. We'll wait to see if more T0 adjustments are in the cards for all of us here tonight. Coming up on 52 and a half minutes before the hope will take off with this Falcon 9 rocket. Want to spin our camera view around the other direction, looking back at the setting sun with the VAB in the foreground. Quite a bit of activity happening in that building, that iconic building here at the Kennedy Space Center. Preparations are very much underway for next year's launch of the Artemis 2 mission. There's a series of briefings happening later this month at the Johnson Space Center to provide some updates and technical insight into the various aspects of the mission, from the human element, of course, since this is the first crewed mission in the Artemis program, alongside the science, both the human involved science, the geological science connected to the moon, as well as some other experiments along the way. You should also learn a lot more about the various intricacies of liftoff and ascent during the mission, and then the return to Earth about 10 days after liftoff. So very much looking forward to all of that coming up in just a couple of weeks. That same week, we will also be introduced to the newest cadre of astronauts as the newest astronaut candidates are introduced to the world. That new group of astronaut candidates comes as the previously newest group of astronauts just sent its first member of its class, the Flies, in Nicole Ayers. She was the first of that astronaut group to head up to the International Space Station as a member of the Crew 10 mission. Time now, unfortunately, T minus 1 hour, 16 minutes, 45 seconds and counting. SpaceX making one more adjustment at least, as they're now looking at a T0 time of 8:59 p.m. Eastern, 00:59 UTC. Time now, T minus 1 hour, 9 minutes, 46 seconds and counting. As we continue to track the progress for SpaceX, hopefully getting into a good weather groove to launch this mission. Want to thank the 1,500 plus view that are watching along with us live. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button and sharing the stream. Allows more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. Also want to thank Jeff Hansen and Aussie Space Girl for stepping in with us tonight as well, alongside Rick Donner and Astro Joe. We're going to step back on our commentary for just a little bit until we get back within the 1 hour mark. So we'll leave you with some space tunes to listen to in the meantime, and you can enjoy the setting sun scenery here on Florida's Space Coast. You're watching Spaceflight Now's live coverage of what will hopefully be, when all is said and done, the launch of PSN's Nusantara Lima spacecraft into a geosynchronous transfer orbit. And once again, we are T minus 1 hour and counting to the, what will hopefully be the planned liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket carrying PSN's Nusantara Lima satellite into a geosynchronous transfer orbit. SpaceX does have a couple more opportunities to slide this launch if needed. The last opportunity is coming up at 9:56 p.m. Eastern, 0156 UTC. With just under an hour currently on the clock, want to pop back into our live chat. Give a big thank you to channel member Artemis for gifting 100 Spaceflight Now memberships. Really appreciate that, Artemis. Also appreciate the contact quote that you dropped in the chat. We were having a good chuckle about that behind the scenes. Also want to thank Artemis once again, this time for a super generous $50 super chat. Really appreciate that, Artemis. Mixing things up a little bit with a Leroy Johnson. Appreciate the support. For those of you who may just be joining the broadcast, SpaceX is counting down to departure time of its Falcon 9 rocket just before the 9 o'clock hour here on the East Coast, setting up the final hour of liftoff opportunities for SpaceX in tonight's window. Coming into tonight's launch opportunity, the 45th Weather Squadron forecast a 45% chance for favorable weather. If SpaceX gets down to the point where they're actually ready to start fueling the Falcon 9 rocket, hopefully we'll get an updated launch weather outlook from SpaceX. If they do need to pivot to their 24-hour backup opportunity tomorrow, Friday the 12th, weather becomes a coin toss, 50% go, 50% no go from a weather perspective tomorrow. Reason for that is there's some drier air that's finally starting to push into Central Florida over the course of tomorrow, which lowers the storm chance, which is why you get a 5% boost in weather outlook in that 24-hour backup scenario. You can see with this radar loop some of that dry weather that's pushing down right now more in the North Florida area, but is soon to be coming to Space Coast near you. Time now T minus 53 minutes, 44 seconds and counting. As we're waiting for SpaceX to make the call on the startup prop load for today's launch operations, fingers crossed. Let's go ahead and take a look at some video of the spacecraft that will hopefully be heading up into orbit in less than an hour from now. This video, courtesy of both Boeing and PSN, the Indonesian satellite company behind this spacecraft. In this part of the video, you're watching the vehicle be wheeled into a thermal vacuum testing chamber, which is designed to put the spacecraft through flight-like environments and ensure that the final construct is ready to support a mission into space. Obviously, a slow and methodical moving process. Here we see the extension of the solar panels here with the vehicle reaching out. You can see near the top of the frame there are some support structures that run along the ceiling that help the solar panel, not with the extension process, but taking some of the load off so that it's a little bit closer to what it would experience in space as opposed to in 1G. And we do have another T0 adjustment as we continue to watch this video. 9:29 is our new T0 time at 9:29. So we are adjusting our clocks. Stand by for that. And you can see we're now at T minus 1 hour, 21 minutes, 23 seconds and counting. This is some video of the spacecraft being transferred over to its transport container, then being very gently lowered down into the box ahead of the lid being placed on. With yet another adjustment to the T0, we're going to go ahead and step back on the commentary once again. We'll be back with you closer to the 1 hour mark. But of course, we're not going to leave you bereft. We will resume our Space Tunes listening. You're watching Spaceflight Now's live coverage of what will, hopefully, when all said and done, be the launch of this SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket with the Nusantara Lima spacecraft heading out to a geosynchronous transfer orbit. We are now once again T minus 1 hour and counting to the current T0 for SpaceX, which is 9:29 p.m. Eastern, 01:29 UTC for those joining around the world. Want to thank a few folks for hopping in to support us during our musical interlude there. Big thanks to Looney Lion for a $5 super chat. Says Fort Lauderdale checking in. Also thanks to channel member Rally GSRL for a 20MX super chat saying thanks Artemis. Yes, Rally is one of the newest gifted channel members via Artemis. Also want to thank channel member Graham McRobert for a £2 super chat. Thank you, Graham. And thanks as well to Virginia for a very generous $20 super chat, who says, student, but supporting this for sure. That's very kind of you, Virginia. SpaceX's window of opportunity tonight lasts until 9:56 p.m. Eastern, 01:56 UTC. So, given the jumps that we've seen them make during this countdown, if this current opportunity is not the one, we'll likely see them bounce ahead to what will possibly be their final launch opportunity of the night. You're looking at the GOES East satellite view, looking at the clouds that are streaming over Florida's Space Coast as we speak. This is the latest loop available from that satellite. Meteorologists pegged this at a 45% chance for favorable weather. Tomorrow conditions improve slightly to 50% as the drier air starts to move further down towards central Florida tomorrow. Time now T minus 52 minutes, 33 seconds and counting. I want to thank Aussie Space Girl, one of our moderators, for being a member with us now for 30 months. Some very kind words saying best launch channel on the web. It's very nice of you, Stephanie. Thanks for being with us for nearly 3 years now. Well, since we have re-racked back to nearly an hour ahead of liftoff, for those of you who weren't with us earlier on in the broadcast, let's do just a quick step through of the countdown timeline. Apologies for those of you for whom this is a little bit of a retread. Just want to make sure everyone is on the same page with now 51 and a half minutes roughly on the clock. If we get down to it, the SpaceX launch director will make the call on the start of prop load, T minus 38 minutes. Fueling, if all goes well, will begin at the T minus 35-minute mark with loading of liquid oxygen on the first stage. The fuel, rocket grade kerosene known as RP1, on both the booster and the upper stage. T minus 30 minutes is when SpaceX starts to load cryogenic helium on board the booster, and then the second stage a few minutes afterwards. That helium is used to pressurize the propellant tanks during flight. 23 minutes out, second stage RP1 load wraps up. And at T minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds is when the chill down of the strong back begins. SpaceX thermally conditioning the feed lines there at the pad ahead of second stage liquid oxygen load. We'll see this visually manifest as the so-called big vent at about T minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds, setting the stage for that LOX to start flowing at the 16-minute mark. T minus 7 minutes is when the engine chill gets underway. SpaceX flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps, helping to protect those engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during startup. 6 minutes out, the first stage kerosene tank is full. And at T minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the strong back begin to move away from the Falcon 9 rocket. First, the clamp arms will open up just beneath the payload fairings, and then that strong back will get into motion, reclining just a few degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket. Then at liftoff, it'll pull back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. 3 minutes before takeoff, the first stage liquid oxygen tank is full. 2 minutes out, same is true in the second stage, at which point the Falcon 9 is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, as the rocket enters into its automated startup sequence, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers, and the propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. The SpaceX launch director will then give their go for launch call at T minus 45 seconds. The engine ignition command will be issued at T minus 3 seconds, and if all 9 Merlins are healthy and ignite as expected, the command will be given for the hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 rocket for a T0 liftoff, currently targeting 9:29 p.m. Eastern, 01:29 UTC, or just about T minus 49 minutes from now. just under 47 minutes to go and less than 10 minutes remaining before the nominal point at which the SpaceX launch director will make the call on the startup prop load tonight. That is, barring another adjustment to the T0, of course. The Falcon booster on tap that you're seeing there live on your screen is B1078 in the SpaceX fleet, getting ready to launch when all is clear for a 23rd time. So before it hits that mark, let's take a moment and talk about the flight history for this particular first stage booster. Its first jaunt to space was in support of a crew mission to the International Space Station. This was the Crew 6 mission, launching on board the Dragon named Endeavour, lifting off from Launch Complex 39A on March 2nd of 2023. That was followed up by a pair of communication satellites for Luxembourg-based SES, the second pair of O3B M-Power satellites built by Boeing, launched on April 28th of 2023. That was followed up by a quartet of Starlink missions. First, we had Starlink 6-4 on June 4th, followed by 6-8 on August 7th, 6-16 on September 16th, and Starlink 6-31 on December 3rd. That was followed up by the launch of the United States Space Force 124 mission, which contains some of the demonstration satellites for Tranche 0 of the Space Development Agency's constellation. Of course, earlier this week, yesterday, as a matter of fact, yesterday morning, we saw the first 21 satellites that were launched as part of the Tranche 1 component of that military constellation of the SDA, as well as the Space Force's Space Systems Command, confirmed a successful deployment of those York Space System built satellites. Coming back to this booster, at this point in its life, it was all Starlinks all the time. Starlink 6-46 on March 25th, 6-53 on April 23rd, 6-60 on May 28th, 10-2 on June 23rd, 10-6 on August 2nd. Actually, one exception to the Starlink rule here. Of course, we had the AST Space Mobile's Bluebird, satellites number 1 through 5, that launched on September 2nd. Aside from that little Bluebird interlude, we had the rest of these as Starlinks. Starlink 10-13 on October 30th, 6-76 on November 27th, 12-6 on December 31st. Then coming into this year, Starlink 12-9 on February 8th, 12-16 on March 15th, 6-72 on April 6th, 6-84 on May 4th, 12-26 on June 13th, 10-26 on July 26th, and most recently, or that was the most recent one, of course, we're looking at hopefully launch number 23 in just shy of 43 minutes from now, barring another shift to the launch time tonight. We're just minutes away from the SpaceX launch director needing to make a call on whether or not they feel like the rocket, the payload, and the weather are in a good position to move forward tonight. We shall see. And we do have yet another new T0 for you all. We're looking at current departure time of 9:45 p.m. Eastern, 9:45 p.m. 01:45 UTC. We've adjusted our clock, as you can see. We're now back at T minus 55 minutes, 27 seconds and counting. With a new time here of 9:45 p.m. Eastern, 01:45 UTC, you can see the latest loop from NOAA's Goes East satellite. Clouds continuing to billow across Florida's Space Coast as the opportunities to launch now grow fewer and fewer. As a reminder, the window of opportunity today closes at 9:56 tonight, so this may be SpaceX's penultimate opportunity today. And SpaceX now targeting the very end of today's window with a new T0 of 9:56 p.m. 9:56 p.m. Eastern, the last opportunity for SpaceX today. Time now T minus 48 minutes and counting. We're just about 10 minutes away from the SpaceX launch director needing to make their now final call on the start of prop load for today, since SpaceX has reached the end of its launch opportunities. So it's either off to the races or they'll have to stand down and pivot to a backup opportunity tomorrow. If it is the latter, as things go, SpaceX has their first launch chance tomorrow beginning at 7:58 p.m. Eastern. It's a roughly 118-minute window tomorrow. Again, if they are unable to launch today. Taking a look at our live chat, I want to thank the more than 2,000 of you who are watching along with us live at this point. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button and sharing the stream, allowing some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage tonight. I also want to welcome in our newest channel member, Eva, joining us with membership at the pad leader level. Welcome aboard, Eva. We're glad to have you with us. Time now, T minus 42 minutes, 42 seconds and counting. Want to thank channel member Bill in Lauderdale for a $5 super chat. Appreciate you, Bill. Saying for the hardworking mods, thanks for all you do. And yes, big thanks to our moderators in the live chat for helping us out for now this fourth consecutive night of attempts to launch this communications satellite from Indonesia. In the hopes that we'll actually see this Falcon 9 rocket take off in 42 minutes. Let's go ahead and talk about the launch timeline for this satellite, the milestones that will happen if all goes well with a good liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket in just a little less than 42 minutes from now, weather permitting. Following departure from pad 40 at about T plus 1 minute 12 seconds post liftoff, the rocket will pass through max Q, or the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. A few different events will happen in rapid succession after that. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff, or MECO, at about T plus 2 minutes and 28 seconds, followed by stage separation and then the ignition of the second stage engine. Payload fairings will be jettisoned nearly 3.5 minutes post liftoff. A few minutes after that, at T plus 6 minutes and 13 seconds, there will be a roughly 22-second long entry burn, which SpaceX will use 3 out of the 9 Merlin 1D engines at the base of the Falcon 9 rocket to begin to slow that stage of the vehicle down and set things up for the start of the landing burn, but not before the second stage engine cuts off at T plus 8 minutes and 7 seconds, followed 2 seconds after that by the start of that landing burn. We'll use just the single center engine on the Falcon booster, setting the stage for this first stage to hopefully have a safe landing on the drone ship called a short fall of gravitas. The upper stage will continue on in a coast phase until about T plus 23 minutes and 13 seconds. There will be a burn of the upper stage Merlin vacuum engine lasting less than a minute. And then, if all goes well, we'll see the deployment of the Nusantara Lima satellite before the half-hour mark. That's going to be sent off into a geosynchronous transfer orbit. Here we are, just under 40 minutes away from the planned liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket, coming up to the final waypoint where SpaceX will make the determination on whether or not they are going to proceed into tanking this Falcon 9 rocket tonight. Time now T minus 37 minutes, 14 seconds and counting. At this point, SpaceX should have made the call on the start of prop load today, so we'll wait for further updates to see if they are in fact tanking the rocket. Given this is a customer mission, as we saw earlier in the week, they did put out a note on their social media that they were fueling, and they also added an update on the weather at that point. So hopefully we'll get a similar update in the next few minutes. If that go ahead was in fact given, fueling is set to begin in just about a minute and a half from now at T minus 35 minutes. Now T minus 35 minutes, 10 seconds and counting. Coming up to the point where fueling is about to begin here. Want to welcome a new channel member, Rich Plain, joining us with membership at the pad leader level. Welcome aboard, Rich. We're glad to have you with us. Now past the 35-minute point in the countdown, assuming SpaceX did give the go-ahead to start fueling, that process is now underway. The loading of RP-1, a rocket-grade kerosene on board the Falcon 9's first and second stages. At the same time, liquid oxygen is potentially now flowing on board the Falcon 9's first stage. Let's go ahead and punch in closer to the Falcon booster, where we'll start to see some signs of fueling if it is in fact underway. If you can just make out the lettering of SpaceX there on the booster and that white line that runs perpendicular across the rocket. That's the area where we'll start to see a little bit of a frost line form and some vapor in that area, as well as the super cold densified liquid oxygen begins to flow on board the rocket's booster. If in fact fueling is underway, that is. And we are just now starting to see a little bit of vapor in that area of the rocket I was talking about, which means SpaceX is in fact fueling its Falcon 9 and it's going to give it the old college try. And hopefully, we'll see this Falcon 9 lift off in just a hair under 32 minutes from now. T minus 30 minutes and counting. For those of you who are just now joining us, SpaceX is now finally fueling its Falcon 9 rocket there at Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. This is SpaceX's final opportunity to launch the Falcon 9 rocket on the mission tonight. If weather doesn't cooperate with this final launch attempt, SpaceX will need to pivot to its backup opportunity on Friday, September 12th, with a 118-minute long window that opens up at 7:56 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. Again, that's only if they're unable to launch tonight. At this point in the countdown, SpaceX is loading a cryogenic helium on board the pressure vessels for the Falcon 9's first stage. They'll do the same on the second, coming up in the next few minutes. That helium will be used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. Time now, T minus 25 minutes, 2 seconds and counting. Tonight's launch, if all is able to move forward, will be the 531st launch of a Falcon 9 rocket, the 114th of the year so far. So before we go ahead and see this latest Falcon 9 rocket launch, again, if all continues to go well for the next 24 and a half minutes or so, let's go ahead and talk about SpaceX's workhorse vehicle, the Falcon 9 rocket, which stands at 70 meters or 229 feet in height and has a diameter of 3.66 meters or 12 feet. Majority of that is made up by the Falcon 9's first stage. This, of course, is the booster with the tail number B1078 in the SpaceX fleet, getting ready to launch for a 23rd time to space and back. At the base of the first stage are 9 Merlin engines, which burn rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen, producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Around the engine compartment are black carbon fiber landing legs that will be used to land the first stage on the drone ship, a short fall of gravitas. Above the first stage is the inner stage. This is a composite structure consisting of an aluminum honeycomb core, which is surrounded by carbon fiber. In that image on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see the deployable hypersonic grid fins. These are titanium winglets that provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9 as it comes back through the atmosphere, tail first like a big old dart heading towards the drone ship. At the top of the inner stage are 3 mechanical latches that attach to the rocket's second stage. At first stage, main engine cutoff, high-pressure helium is used to release those latches, and 4 pneumatic pushers ensure a clean separation. Also, the second stage engine nozzle is housed safely inside the inner stage adapter until the point of stage separation. Speaking of that second stage, the upper stage of the Falcon 9 rocket powered by a single modified Merlin engine called a Merlin vacuum engine or an MVAC engine. It's equipped with a large nozzle which is optimized for burns in the vacuum of space, hence the name. It produces more than 220,500 pounds of thrust, and it will be fired twice ahead of the deployment of the Nusantara Lima spacecraft. Like with the first stage, the upper stage engine also burns the same propellant mix, that is RP1 and LOX. Finally, at the top of the Falcon 9 stack are the payload fairings, currently encapsulating the N5 satellite. Fairing is made up of a carbon composite material and stands 13.1 meters or 43 feet in height, and together are 5.2 meters or 17.1 feet in diameter. Two halves will be recovered a little bit further downrange from where the booster lands on the drone ship. Now, T minus 20 minutes, 40 seconds and counting. We're just about 20 seconds away from the start of the so-called big vent, a good visual indication that the chill down of the feed lines is in work. And the big vent is underway. Time now, T minus 17 minutes, 34 seconds and counting. Got just about a minute remaining on this big vent before SpaceX turns to the loading of liquid oxygen on board the rocket's upper stage, set to begin at the 16-minute mark. In a conclusion to the big vent there, second stage lock load set to start in roughly 20 seconds. Just about 14 and a half minutes remaining on the clock. We should be getting pad level views of the Falcon 9 rocket here momentarily. Here's an image of the Nusantara Lima satellite before it was encapsulated in the Falcon 9's payload fairings. SpaceX commentator Chris Gebhardt says the Falcon 9 rocket and the payload are healthy. Weather still remains a watch item as they're keeping an eye on some clouds in the area of the pad. So things are still progressing towards a launch attempt coming up in about 12 and a half minutes, but they are going to continue to watch the weather right up to the last moments. Taking a look back at our live chat, want to thank K2 Hat for a $5 super chat. K2 says, hello from Mico, Florida, about 50 miles away. Thanks for the coverage. Also, thanks to Spring Hill, Florida for a $5 super chat. Thank you so much for supporting us tonight. And thanks to the 3,700 plus of you who are watching along with us live today. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button and sharing the stream, allowing some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage tonight. With just about 11 minutes remaining on the board, the countdown continuing, let's go ahead and talk about the trajectory for today's mission where this Falcon 9 is going to fly. If all continues to go well and weather permits, the Falcon 9 rocket, following its ascent from Space Launch Complex 40 there at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, will fly due east away from Florida's spaceport. The first stage booster, tail number B1078, will target a landing on the drone ship, a short fall of gravitas following stage separation. If successful today, well, first off, if there's a launch today, and then secondarily, if the booster landing is successful, that would be the 124th good touchdown for that particular drone ship and the 503rd booster landing for SpaceX to date. SpaceX is also, of course, interested in recovering the payload fairings in addition to the booster. Following separation, they will splash down in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean under the support of steerable parachutes. They will then be brought aboard one of SpaceX's recovery vessels, brought back through Port Canaveral, and then onto the Hangar X site, where they will be refurbished and turned around for future missions. Just under 9 minutes to go now. Less than 2 minutes away from the start of the engine chill sequence, when SpaceX will flow a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps, helping to protect the 9 Merlin engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during startup. Coming up on 7 minutes now on the start of that engine chill I mentioned a moment ago. Want to welcome in new channel member Kari, joining us with channel membership at the pad leader level. There's a live look at the drone ship, a short fall of gravitas, patiently waiting out in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Again, this will be the 124th successful touchdown if all goes well tonight. It would also be the 409th booster landing for SpaceX using a drone ship. Past the 6 minute mark now. First stage RP1 loading has wrapped up. SpaceX notes that one of the fairing halves being used today is flying for a 24th time and the other for a 16th time. Just about a minute away from the beginning of the strong back retraction. First, the clamp arms just beneath the payload fairings will open up, and then the transporter erector, or the strong back, will recline a few degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket and stay in that position until liftoff. Just under 5 minutes and counting. Tanks are now pressurizing for the start of strong back retract. There you see the clamp arms opening up just beneath the payload fairings. Strong back should reach its final recline point in roughly 10 seconds. Coming up at the 3 minute mark is when the first stage liquid oxygen tank should be full.
One, LOX load complete.
Good call there for completion of stage one LOX load. We should hear a similar call regarding the second stage at about the T-2 minute mark.
Stage 2, LOX load complete.
And with that good call out, the Falcon 9 rocket is now fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. You're seeing the ground gas closeouts here now. SpaceX releases the remaining liquid oxygen from the feed lines there at the pad.
When the vented oxygen hits
ground
the warm,
gas closeouts.
humid Florida.
Good call there. Coming up to the final minute of the count when the rocket will enter into its automated startup sequence. And if the weather is in an acceptable posture, we'll hopefully hear a go for launch call, T-minus 45 seconds.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
And with that call, we now await the SpaceX launch director to see if they're ready to give that go for launch call.
Launch director, go for launch.
And we finally have a go for launch call on the Nusantara Lima mission, coming up on the final 30 seconds before the planned liftoff. Twelve seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of the Nusantara Lima mission from Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Falcon 9 has cleared the towers.
And at T plus 30 seconds and counting, Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. In just a few seconds, we'll start throttling down the 9 Merlin engines in preparation for max Q, the period of maximum aerodynamic pressure. This is a critical moment during flight because the combined stresses caused by Falcon 9 accelerating through the atmosphere and the ambient static pressure are at their greatest.
Falcon 9 supersonic.
To help go from vertical to horizontal, the first stage has performed a pitch kick maneuver. This maneuver, known as the gravity turn, gimbals Falcon 9's engines just a small amount to slowly turn the first stage so that it's going from straight up to a more horizontal orientation. And as you heard, we have passed through max Q.
The rocket passing through max Q. SpaceX is coming up on a few events in fairly rapid succession now. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff at about T plus 2 minutes and 28 seconds. That'll be followed by stage separation and then the ignition of the Merlin vacuum engine on the rocket's second stage. MVAC chill is currently underway. Coming up on the second minute into flight. Less than 30 seconds to MECO. Coming up to main engine cutoff, let's listen in.
Main engine cutoff. MVAC startup.
Good callouts, good visuals. Here you can see the hypersonic grid fins now deploying on the Falcon 9 first stage booster as the Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage begins a good first burn. Coming up on the deployment of the payload fairings in now less than 20 seconds. Those fairing halves, once jettisoned, will make their way towards a splashdown in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean, a little bit further downrange from where the booster lands on the drone ship.
And confirmation of payload fairing jettison, which you just saw there on your screen.
And a nice view of the Nusantara Lima spacecraft, and I believe a little cameo by the moon there, just off the edge of the spacecraft. Just about 4 minutes into flight now at this point in the mission. Roughly 2 minutes away from the start of the first stage entry burn. That will use 3 out of the 9 Merlin engines to help slow the vehicle down, set the stage for the start of the landing burn. Looks like the Falcon booster has reached its apogee in the flight today, topping out at about 119 kilometers in altitude. You can see the telemetry data in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Now starting to make its descent towards the drone ship, a short fall of gravitas. Now 5 minutes into the mission. We're a little more than a minute away from the start of the entry burn. Coming up on 6 minutes into flight now, less than 30 seconds away from the start of the entry burn.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
Good start to the entry burn here. This will last less than 30 seconds.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
And with the conclusion of that landing burn, excuse me, of the entry burn that sets the stage for the landing burn, that will follow the second stage engine cutoff, which will happen first here on this mission. SECO 1, or second stage engine cutoff, is coming up at about T plus 8 minutes and 7 seconds, followed a couple seconds later by the start of the landing burn. Booster now transonic, traveling below the speed of sound, coming upon the start of, again, both the landing burn as well as the cutoff of the Merlin vacuum engine. Let's go ahead and listen into those milestones.
Stage 1 landing bird.
And there we
MVAC shut down.
see just about the same time Falcon 9's first stage reigniting its center Merlin engine for the landing burn as Stage 2's MVAC engine cut off after reaching orbit.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy.
Nominal parking orbit insertion.
And Falcon 9 has landed
Stage
on
1
the
landing
shortfall of Gravitas drone ship. Just as it was touching down, we also had confirmation that Stage 2 is in the correct orbit. So with that, we now have roughly 14 minutes of coast as the second stage moves to the point in its orbit to do its next burn, which will send the Nusantara Lima satellite into a geosynchronous transfer orbit. The start.
Nice view of the Nusantara Lima satellite now that this coast phase has begun. Coming up to the second stage engine's second burn at about T plus 23 minutes and 13 seconds. That burn will last less than a minute in total. It's at the stage for the Nusantara Lima satellite to be deployed into a geosynchronous transfer orbit at about T plus 27 minutes and 25 seconds. Certainly good news to get this rocket off the pad and clear the way for NASA, Northrop Grumman, and SpaceX to start preparations now at the launch site for the forthcoming launch of the NG-23 mission, a Cygnus spacecraft that is going to be heading up to the International Space Station. Launch is currently scheduled for Sunday, September 14th. With the launch today, we'll see if SpaceX and NASA still have enough time to ready that pad in order for launch on Sunday. Coming up on 12 minutes into flight with this mission, we are readying our launch replays for you that will go ahead and bring in momentarily. Looking at live telemetry view of both the first stage now safely on the drone ship, a shortfall of Gravitas, as well as the upper stage of the Falcon 9 making its way across the Atlantic Ocean. It'll pass just off the coast of the western tip of Africa as it continues to make its way towards deploying this satellite into a geosynchronous transfer orbit. But so far, all going well with this Falcon 9 rocket launch. Good liftoff at the end of the window after 3 previous days of scrubs. And it sounds like we've got those replays ready for you on the back end. So let's go ahead and go to those now. We'll start with the fixed view from here at the press site. Moving on to the wide camera view. Moving on to Pete's South tracker. Off-site from the press site, it was quite cloudy for both Pete and Chuck, so you'll see that, or rather not see that. Moving on to the Merritt Island tracker from Chuck and Jen. And finally, the tracker view from Adam at the press site. and some good work by our tracking team amid some challenging launch conditions. But of course, the most important thing is that this rocket was able to take off from Pad 40, clear the way for a very important cargo resupply mission to the orbiting outpost, and that the folks in Indonesia and the surrounding areas will soon get this satellite added into orbit, begin its operations early next year. The satellite's set to reach its orbiting position at about January time frame of 2026. Services to start later on in early 2026 as well. We're just about at the 20-minute mark in the mission. Coming up next will be a quick burn on the upper stage engine, lasting less than a minute in total. As we await that milestone, want to thank one of our channel members, Skunkhogger PS4, for being a member with us for now 16 months at the mission specialist level. We're going to bring our Space Tunes back for the next few minutes, and then we'll be back with you for more commentary as SpaceX prepares for its second and final pre-deployment burn of its upper stage engine. And we're coming up to the burn of the Merlin vacuum engine. Let's listen in.
MVAC startup.
And there we have good call out of the ignition of the MVAC engine. This is the second burn of the MVAC on today's flight. The first burn started around 2.5 minutes into launch and lasted for about 5.5 minutes until we reached our initial orbit, which we call a parking orbit. The burn taking place right now will place the Nusantara Lima satellite into its needed geosynchronous transfer orbit for payload deploy. Let's watch and listen in for confirmation of shutdown and a good burn.
MVAC shutdown.
Confirmation that the MVAC engine shut down as expected. For the next 7 minutes, we'll be in another coast before we reach
Nominal orbit insertion.
deployment of the Nusantara Lima satellite. And there was confirmation that we are in the proper orbit for payload deploy. So with that, we're going to take a short break, and we'll see you back here in a few minutes at about T plus 27 minutes.
Little more than 25 minutes into the mission so far. We've got about 2 minutes remaining until the deployment of the Nusantara Lima spacecraft, following a good second burn. Taking a look at our live chat, want to thank Stephen Strickland for gifting a Spaceflight Now membership. Really appreciate that, Stephen. And to our newest gifted channel member, welcome aboard. Glad to have you with us. If you haven't already, be sure to thank Stephen in the live chat. And we hope you decide to stick around with channel membership. And yes, because this is both a customer mission with a non-classified payload, also that it's not a payload that has got an adapter that is so large that it obscures the cameras, we will be able to see the deployment of this satellite coming up here in just a little more than a minute's time. Tomorrow, there will be a briefing regarding the NG-23 mission, so we should get an update then as to whether or not NASA and SpaceX feel like they've got enough time to turn around the pad for a launch attempt of that Cygnus spacecraft on Sunday, or if they may have to push that off to the start of the work week. Either way, we'll be ready and waiting with live coverage to bring to you for that mission. Also want to welcome a new channel member, Pamela Tobias, joining us with membership at the mission specialist level. Let's go ahead and listen in now to deployment.
Eastern Time from Space Launch Complex 40 at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. About 2.5 minutes later, the first stage shut down and separated, and then headed for a successful landing on the A Shortfall of Gravitas drone ship in the Atlantic Ocean about 8.5 minutes after taking off from Pad 40. The second stage then took the Nusantara Lima satellite into its desired transfer orbit via 2 burns of its MVAC engine. We're now standing by for that geostationary communications satellite for Pacific Satellite Nusantara, or PSN, to be deployed. Here's a little bit more about today's payload.
Indonesia is an ocean of islands, more than 17,000, where distance can stand between people and opportunity. PSN set out to change that. Nusantara Lima is
We unfortunately had to bring down the audio from this video since it does contain music, and we don't know if this is royalty free and don't want to potentially incur a copyright strike from YouTube. You're looking at some B-roll from a pre-produced package from PSN describing the Nusantara Lima satellite, which will help bolster communications for folks in that country and in the greater region around. It's a rendering of the satellite operating in geostationary Earth orbit at about 113 degrees east. Let's listen back in.
Now, Stage 2 and the satellite are over southern Africa after lifting off from Space Launch Complex 40 at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. Nusantara Lima will be the newest satellite in Pacific Satellite Nusantara's fleet. The geostationary communications satellite will have the largest capacity in Asia using very high throughput satellite technology. Indonesia is the world's largest archipelago with many remote islands that are challenging to reach to provide internet to. The Nusantara Lima satellite will be critical in providing this essential connectivity across the island nation's 17,000 islands. You can see a good view here of the MVAC engine that brought us into the needed geosynchronous transfer orbit today. And there is a good view from a camera located on the top of Falcon 9's second stage, looking at the bottom of the Nusantara Lima satellite, which we should see deploy here in just about a minute. For the launch portion of today's mission, the Falcon 9 booster that performed the first part of the ascent was supporting its 23rd flight, while the two payload-faring halves were supporting their 16th and 11th missions respectively today. Those payload fairings will be picked up out of the Atlantic Ocean by our recovery ship Doug, and the booster, which landed on a shortfall of gravitas, will be brought back to Port Canaveral for refurbishment for a later mission, as will the payload fairings. We should see payload deploy in just a few seconds. And like clockwork, there we go. Nusantara Lima is flying free in its geosynchronous transfer orbit after being launched successfully by Falcon 9 today. And also getting a good view of sunrise as Falcon 9 circles the Earth after lifting off in darkness from Florida. But with confirmation of payload deploy, that will bring an end to our live launch coverage. As always, we want to thank Pacific Satellite Nusantara for entrusting us with today's mission, as well as the Eastern Range and the Federal Aviation Administration for their support. A big thank you to all of you for joining us for today's mission. If you're interested in more launch coverage, head on over to spacex.com/launches for the most up-to-date information. When you're there, make sure to check out our new departure board as well, featuring our upcoming launches with details such as mission name, launch and landing site, and liftoff times. Also, remember to follow SpaceX on X, and we will see you next time.
And with a good deployment of the Nusantara Lima satellite, let's pivot now to our mission stats as they currently stand. This was the 23rd flight of Falcon Booster B10. Actually, it should be B1078 in the SpaceX fleet. A typo there. This was the 531st Falcon 9 launch to date, the 114th launch of 2025. This is SpaceX's 466th Falcon booster reflight, or the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. This is SpaceX's 161st orbital launch within the last 365 days, the 277th orbital flight from Pad 40, and the 332nd overall orbital launch from Pad 40 as well. Here's where SpaceX now stands on the year-over-year bar chart. Moving on to some recovery stats. That was the 124th good landing on the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas. It marked the 409th drone ship landing for SpaceX and the 503rd overall booster landing as well. Finally, with some industry stats, this was the 77th orbital launch from the Sunshine State, the 120th from U.S. soil, the 132nd from U.S. Rocket Company, and the 209th orbital launch attempt around the world. There have been 5 orbital failures so far this year. Here is where our pie chart now currently stands. And with that, we're going to go ahead and bring our launch coverage to a close tonight. After a string of scrubs, a good flight for the Falcon 9 rocket, and now on to the next venture. I want to thank our friends P. Carsons with Max Q Productions and Chuck and Jen Briggs for doing their level best to track through some tricky clouds. Also, thanks to all of our moderators in the live chat who have been helping us out tonight. Thanks to Mark Otto, Aussie Space Girl, Rick Donner, Jeff Hansen, Astros, Joe, and Jen. Appreciate all of you for helping us out tonight. Big thanks to our photography team who have been doggedly working this launch campaign in preparation for what were some unfortunate scrubs throughout the week, and finally got the reward of a launch today. So if you're not following the team on X, now is a great time to do so. You can find them at their handles. We'll bring that up on screen now. John is at John Pisani Photo, Michael MD Kane Jr., and Adam at A Burn NYC. Also, be sure to follow Spaceflight Now, simply at Spaceflight Now. We are on Threads, X, Blue Sky, and Facebook. Big thanks as well to our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, who's been running the technical operations of the broadcast alongside John Pisani. Most importantly, though, thanks to you for wherever you've been watching from tonight. We certainly appreciate your time and attention, and we look forward to welcoming you back in when next we have launch coverage. So now's a great time to hit that subscribe button, ring that bell, and so you won't miss any of our next live broadcasts or new videos that go up on the YouTube channel. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others. We will see you next time, folks. And until then, bye-bye.